The moment I blinked, it stepped closer. I won't say which part of the country this happened in, but if you've been driving for hours and there's nothing around you except endless dry corn, shimmering heat haze above the asphalt, and rusty water towers that look like the skeletons of giants, just don't stop. Press the gas until the speedometer needle starts to tremble, and don't even think about looking in the rearview mirror. My name is Ethan, I'm 19, and that summer I was desperately in need of money and silence. The job sounded like a sociopath's dream. Look after old Elias's farm while he recovered from surgery in a city hospital. The farm was located in the middle of nowhere. Hundreds of acres of corn, taller than a human being, surrounded the old wooden house like a living, rustling ocean. The only road back to civilization was a narrow strip of gravel that vanished without a trace into the greenery after a couple of miles. Elias left me a short list of instructions, written in a trembling hand on the back of an electricity bill. Feed the dog, which, by the way, disappeared on the very first night. Keep an eye on the generator, and, this was underlined 3 times, check the 3 scarecrows in the field. Every evening, exactly at sunset, I was supposed to step out onto the porch and make sure they were standing in their places.
Don't let them get bored, boy.
The old man rasped as he said goodbye.
But don't look under the burlap either.
At the time, I thought it was just senile rambling. The air on the farm was thick and sweet with pollen, and the silence was so absolute that I could hear blood pulsing in my temples. But it wasn't a peaceful silence. It was tense, as if the entire vast field was holding its breath, waiting for me to make a mistake. The first 3 days passed in a strange stupor. I walked around the house, fixed the fence, and tried not to stare at the field for too long. But on the 4th evening, as the sun began to drown in the sea of corn, staining everything the color of dried blood, I stepped out onto the porch with binoculars. 3 scarecrows. The first, Old Joe, stood on the left, its head tilted to the side. The second, Skinny, loomed in the center. The third, the witch, froze on the right. They looked like ordinary dolls made of straw and old rags, mounted on wooden poles. But when I moved the binoculars toward the barn, my heart skipped a beat. There was a 4th one. It stood much closer to the house than the others, almost at the very edge of the mowed grass. It was wearing a red flannel shirt with a black check pattern. My shirt, the very one I had left in the laundry the day before and couldn't find that morning. The scarecrow wasn't nailed to a pole. It was simply standing on the ground, swaying slightly in a wind I couldn't feel. Its arms, stuffed with dry grass, hung lifelessly along its body, and its head, made of coarse burlap, was turned directly toward my windows. I felt an icy chill crawl down my spine. I clearly remembered Elias mentioning only 3. I lowered the binoculars to rub my eyes. It took no more than 2 seconds. When I looked at the field again, the 4th scarecrow was no longer near the barn. It had moved 5 meters forward. Now it was standing right on the path leading to the porch. I froze, my head filled with static, and my palms instantly became slick with sweat. This couldn't be real. Straw dolls don't walk. Maybe it was local kids playing a prank on a city guy? I looked around, hoping to see laughing teenagers hiding in the corn, but the field remained motionless. I looked at the 4th scarecrow again. It wasn't moving. It looked like a lifeless heap of straw dressed in my clothes. But the moment I turned away to grab the flashlight standing by the door, a dry, rustling sound came from behind me. You know that sound, dry corn when a large animal pushes through it. I spun around. The scarecrow was already 10 steps from the porch. It stood in an unnatural pose, one of its legs thrust forward, as if it had been frozen mid-step. Now I could see its face more clearly. There were no drawn eyes or mouth on the coarse burlap, but the folds of the fabric were beginning to form a terrifyingly familiar pattern. A chin, the shape of a nose, the line of a jaw. It wasn't just copying my clothes. It was copying me. Terror locked my limbs in place. I realized that as long as I was looking at it, it couldn't move. It was like a quantum nightmare that existed only when it wasn't being observed. I began slowly backing toward the door, never taking my eyes off the red shirt. My eyelids burned from the strain. My eyes watered, begging for even a single quick blink. But I knew if I blinked, it would be on the steps. I felt the doorknob with my hand without taking my eyes off the straw double. For a moment, a gust of wind swayed the corn, and one tall stalk blocked my view for a single second. That second was enough. There was a sharp crunch sound, like dry stalk snapping. When the stalk moved aside, the scarecrow was already standing at the very first step of the porch. Its head was tilted upward, the burlap stretched tight, and I saw eye sockets. Empty, dark hollows staring straight at me, and from beneath the sleeves of my shirt, what stuck out weren't fingers, but sharp, yellow corn cobs. I bolted into the house and slammed the door, locking every bolt. My breathing was ragged, my chest burned. I pressed my back against the oak door, listening to the silence. First, nothing happened, and then I heard it. A slow, heavy sound of dry burlap rubbing against wood. It was climbing the steps. Every second stretched into an hour. I felt the vibrations of its movement traveling through the door into my spine. It stopped, right there behind the thin layer of wood. I held my breath, afraid that even the sound of my exhale would be an invitation. Then the scratching began. It wasn't a knock. It was the sound of hundreds of dry blades of grass trying to find a gap in the doorframe. Thin straw stalks began to push into the keyhole, rustling and writhing like tiny yellow worms. I jumped away from the door to the center of the living room. The whole house now felt not like a fortress, but like a fragile box the creature was slowly prying open. I turned on every lamp, but the light was dim. The generator in the basement was sputtering, emitting a strained howl. The scraping moved to the window. In horror, I saw a burlap head slowly rise behind the glass. It wasn't standing on the ground. It must have pulled itself up on the windowsill. Now, in the electric light, the transformation was obvious. Where the faceless sack had been, there was now my face, my lips, my forehead. Even the scar above my left eyebrow were perfectly recreated by the folds of burlap. Only instead of skin, there was a dry, yellow surface. It pressed its face against the glass. Its mouth, a slit in the fabric, slowly opened, and black dust and corn seeds spilled out. It wasn't screaming. It was whispering in my own voice, but the sound was like wind driving dry leaves through an empty corridor. Open, it's cramped. Inside, Ethan. I grabbed a kitchen knife, even though I knew you can't kill something made of straw and emptiness. Couldn't blink. Every time my eyes involuntarily closed for a fraction of a second, the creature was in a new position. Now its hands were pressed against the glass with such force that it began to crack. I could see that beneath my flannel shirt there weren't muscles shifting, but dense bundles of corn cobs. The entire night turned into an exhausting battle for the right not to close my eyes. I sat on the floor, surrounded by lamps, staring at the windows and doors. The creature was constantly moving. It circled the house, scraped at the walls, pounded on the roof. Sometimes it sounded like I could hear the patter of hundreds of tiny feet, as if field mice were running inside its straw body. "Why are you afraid of yourself?" it whispered beneath the door. "We just want to switch." The smell of dry grass became unbearable, filled the house, making me cough. My mind began playing cruel tricks on me. It seemed like my own hands were becoming dry and brittle. I looked at my skin and saw strange patterns on it, like interwoven fibers. Around 4 in the morning, the generator finally died. The lamps flickered and went out. I was left in total darkness. I heard the door begin to slowly open, despite the bolts. The creak of the hinges sounded like mockery. I retreated to the farthest corner of the kitchen, holding the knife out in front of me. I couldn't see it, but I could smell it. The smell of harvest and old, stagnant dust. I felt something dry and cold touch my ankle. Straw wrapped around my leg, slowly climbing higher. I screamed, slashing the knife into empty air, and at that moment, the first ray of sunlight cut through the gray pre-dawn sky through the window. With the arrival of light, everything went quiet. I opened my eyes. I was lying on the kitchen floor, the door tightly shut. There wasn't a single straw on the floor, not a trace, as if the entire night had been nothing but a product of a feverish dream. But red, itchy marks remained on my ankle. I didn't pack my things. I ran out of the house, jumped into my old pickup, and floored the gas pedal, kicking up a cloud of gravel dust. I drove without looking back at the farm, without looking at the endless rows of corn that seemed to lean toward my truck as I passed. An hour later, I reached the nearest town, a tiny settlement with a single gas station and a diner. I stopped to catch my breath. My heart was still pounding, and my throat was dry from the dust. I pulled down the sun visor to look at myself in the small mirror. I expected to see a pale, terrified guy with dark circles under his eyes. But what I saw made me freeze. My face really was pale, but the skin, it was strangely matte and motionless. I tried to smile, but the corners of my mouth moved with difficulty, as if the skin were too tight and dry. I touched my cheek. It wasn't warm. Felt rough like well-tanned burlap. And the worst part, beneath the skin where I pressed my finger, I felt no resistance from soft tissue. There was a distinct, dry crunch of straw. I looked in the rearview mirror at the road I had come from. Far on the horizon, among the fields, stood a scarecrow. It was wearing my red flannel shirt and was simply watching me leave. And I looked at my hands and saw tiny yellow tendrils of dry corn slowly beginning to push out from beneath my fingernails. I survived, but I'm not sure that the one sitting in this car right now is still me.